Okay, this is YM, and if you're new to my page, it's probably because of the video I made yesterday about Whitney Houston and Alan Turing, who were both neurodivergent LGBTQ creatives, one being a scientist and one being an artist. So one thing I wanted to fill y'all in on, because there's a lot of confusion about what autism is, and it's understandable because most of the information we get about autism is inaccurate, even from the medical community. So let's talk about autism for a bit. So first, this is what autism is. It's just a neural way of being, and it depends on how the neural connections in your brain are organized. How it manifests from an autistic standpoint is generally we see the world differently and we see humans differently than most people. For the most part, we see ourselves as standing outside the rest of humanity. That's the best way I can put it. I mean, that's the way most autistic people describe it. Like, we're outside of human society watching everybody else. And we see y'all not just as people, but as a collection of systems and a collection of codes and social mores that we may or may not understand. A common experience that autistics have, not saying all autistic people have this, but a common experience we have is that we don't do casual small talk. We can't just meet people and talk about the weather. We can't just chit chat with strangers, because if we're just on a surface level having a surface conversation and not going too deep, autistic people get bored. We get bored, and also we get confused about what your motives are, because we don't know what you're doing. Like, we don't know if you actually like us. We don't know if you're trying to hide something from us. We don't know if you're trying to manipulate us, because we struggle to read nonverbal cues. That's a struggle autistic people have. So you'll notice we tend to lean toward being candid, being plain spoken, like what we say is what we mean. We're not going to be the type of people that try to soften the blow with our words. We're just going to say exactly what we mean, and we expect other people to do it too. And the truth of the matter is, most of the world does not think and communicate in the way that we do. So I'm definitely going to have to do subsequent videos, because I can't encapsulate all of what autism is in a single 3-minute video. But suffice to say, autistic people think differently and we communicate differently than most in the world. And that's what makes us unique and special. And I love being autistic. So part 2. So let's talk about diagnosis of autism and why doctors really cannot diagnose it. Number one, this is very important. Autism is not a disease. It is not a disorder. It is not a condition that you can observe externally with symptoms and diagnose. That ain't how autism works. Often, you'll get parents and doctors that say, oh, I think my kid is autistic because they're not meeting some developmental milestone in infancy, or the kid is nonverbal. They're at the age where they should be talking, but they are not. They cannot verbally speak, or they don't verbally speak, and there are many reasons for that. So the parent and the doctor assume, oh, well, this kid doesn't speak. They are 18 months old. They should be at the age where they're just talking and babbling away, and my baby doesn't speak. What's going on? So the doctor and parent assume that there's a disorder preventing the child from speaking, right? But here's the thing. Being nonverbal is not a symptom of autism. It's just one of the ways that autism manifests. Do you understand what I'm saying? I have never been nonverbal at any point in my life. Ever since I could talk, I've been talking. I've never been nonverbal. I've never had any form of mutism other than having laryngitis. There's never been a day in my life where I could not talk. But I've been autistic since birth. Now, if I'm completely verbal, if I meet all the developmental milestones and the intellectual milestones, also, I came into kindergarten being able to read on a 4th grade level. Those are the things that were true of me. So how is a doctor supposed to assess that I'm autistic as opposed to my late sister Michelle, who was also autistic? Oh, well, Michelle had developmental delays. Her speech, she has speech differences. She has trouble pronouncing words. It took her longer to get toilet trained. This is why we would say Michelle is autistic as opposed to YM being autistic. But again, here's another problem. Michelle was intellectually disabled. That's why she had the speech and developmental issues. I am intellectually privileged. I'm a so-called genius, and that was apparent from the time I walked into kindergarten, right? Does that mean that Michelle and I are not autistic, or that Michelle is and I'm not, or that I'm not and she is? There's no way a doctor can tell because Michelle and I have the same condition. It just manifests differently because of the other traits and conditions we have. Again, there is no way to externally tell someone that. So in my previous videos, I've talked about the fact that autism cannot really be diagnosed by doctors because it's not a disease or disorder. It doesn't have a disease pathology. So you're probably wondering why, if doctors cannot diagnose autism like we've been taught all these years, then how can you know that you're autistic? How could you know that Michelle and your mom and grandmother and grandfather were autistic? And how could you know that Whitney Houston and Alan Turing were autistic since you never met them? Here's how I know other autistic people. Autistic people ourselves are the best people to recognize autism in ourselves and each other. And like I said, again, autism is a way of being, and it's based on the neural connections and neural networks in our brains. Again, but one of the common traits, our tendency toward direct candor and honesty. We are not people who do well with polite dishonesty or white lies. We're going to tell you straight up, right? Here in the South, our tendency is to when we disagree with you or when we think you're an asshole, we'll say bless your heart. I've never really done that because if I disagree with someone or I think they're an asshole, I'll just tell them straight up. And I've done that since I was a kid. I'll just tell them. And many times I had to be reprimanded or punished or corrected to not do that because my tendency is toward honesty. Another issue with autistic folks who are in marginalized communities, for example, I'm African American. I grew up in the American South here in the United States, and I'm transgender. I'm a transmasculine person, right? So we have in marginalized communities, especially African American community, a concept called code switching, which is being able to present yourself as one way around the dominant class and another way around people in your own community. So with African Americans, a lot of times the way that we talk, our dialects, our language, African American English, we'll use it around each other, but we won't use it at work or at school around where a lot of white folks are because we don't want to be seen as inferior or hood compared to white folks. Now, for me, I have a hard time code switching because for me, code switching is masking, and I struggle with masking. I struggle to put on a mask, whether I'm at work or at school or wherever I'm at. I'm generally gonna be honest with people. I'll be polite, but I'm generally gonna be honest. Masking's hard when you're autistic.